One, two, three.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin. And can I just remind you that Scéalta is a joint production of Fáilte Fears to Hear and Féileán Phobal. My guest today is Declan Lawn, who I'm going to take you down a journey that he's been on, but more important, he's going to take you down that journey. So Declan, I don't know how I know you're a partner, you're a father, you're an investigative journalist, you're involved in script writing for films, you're an ardent hill walker apparently, and you're quite good at it. When I was asking you just before we come on air, why you decided this change in, well, not so much a change, but a wee bit of broadness in your own profession as a journalist. You said for your mind and for your body, that it's a relief. It's out of that. So tell me where it all began. I know born in Derry or lived in Derry.
Yeah. So my parents, I suppose you could say, were blow-ins to the north. My mother was from Galway, a wee place called Newbridge in North Galway near Mount Bellew. My father was from Ballyshannon in South Donegal, and they both met working in the Bank of Ireland in Killybegs. And so in 1974, the two of them, aged only 24 and 25, moved to Derry, which in those days was quite the move.
People were moving the other way.
Absolutely. I asked her recently, actually, I asked my mum, why did you do it? And the only answer she could come up with was, we were young and we wanted adventure. Now, I think it was also easier back then to get a promotion in the Bank of Ireland if you were willing to go to the north. So there was it, but they moved to Derry in 74 at the height of the conflict. And that is where I spent the first, I went right through primary school there until I was 11. And looking back now, it really was an extraordinary thing for them to do. But then I suppose you're young. So I would have grown up, born in 1976, and my earliest memories of, being in the town, you remember the bomb scares, the sound of the bombs, the soldiers everywhere, just a really deep immersion and all of that. But of course, you don't think it's strange. I didn't think it was strange. I just thought that was the world. That was the way the world was. So we were in Derry then. I was about 8 when we moved out to Limavady, but I kept going to primary school in Derry every day. My mum she worked in Shipkey Street. We'd drive up, every day, and she'd pick me up after school. And so we're in Limavady for a few years. And then when I was 11, we moved to Ballymena. And the reason we did all of those moves was because my dad was in the bank, and we kept, every few years he'd get a promotion. So looking back, I suppose it was quite disruptive. You'd be in a place, you'd get used to it, you'd have your friends, and then all of a sudden you're in a different place. And the move from Derry to Ballymena was culturally massive. Now, I couldn't really articulate it to myself, because the thing about my parents was they were quite apolitical because they'd come from the south. So basically, I don't even know if they really had the tools to decode everything that was going on. The way people who have grown up here for generations would be steeped in the reality of the place.
It's almost like an instinct.
An instinct, So we never talked politics at home. I mean, I knew they were, broadly nationalist, but my dad was, when he was the bank manager in Ballymena, he ordered, got the same papers every morning from the newsagent, and he got the newsletter and the Irish Times, and I never questioned that for years. So it was a funny upbringing in the north, really, because it was almost like you were in the thick of it, but also politically kind of at home. I was outside of it. It was only when I became a teenager that I started to read more and become aware more of things that I kind of educated myself about the place.
Were you a happy child?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I had a happy upbringing. I did. A younger brother and a younger sister. even though we moved a lot, I kind of always found it relatively easy to make friends. So I have fond memories of Derry, but I also have fond memories of Limavady and Ballymena. Yeah, I had a very happy upbringing.
One of the things that we do with our victims, and I was going to call you a guest, but you're probably better described as a victim of Scéalta, is that we try, of course, and you're a journalist, so you know how this works. We try and get information just a wee bit, so we can put you off balance, that we have the advantage. So we try and do that. And I was asking a friend, and if you bribe me, I'll tell you who it was, but I was asking a friend about you to kind of summarize you. And he said, fiercely loyal. And he said, meticulous in everything he does. And then he added, you know, he'll never need a critic. He's his own worst critic.
That's interesting. So, that's true.
Does that ring a bell? Is that a fair assessment of you?
Yeah, I think it is. I definitely have been, to take the last one first, I definitely have been my worst critic. I like throughout my life, and probably still am, even to the point where it paralyzed me for many years in pursuing the thing that I really wanted to pursue, which was being a writer. So for years and years and years, I was an avid reader. I always aspired to be a writer. I thought maybe a novelist, but I had a massive confidence problem, and I'm not entirely sure where that came from, because it didn't come from, you know, my upbringing or my parents, or and the way that would have manifested itself would have been, so I might have tried to write a short story, read it the next day, and just be so embarrassed by how terrible it was that I just, you know, rip it up into little bits, or, you know, press delete on the file in the computer. And so sometimes I think, looking back, I'm 44 now, I think looking back, I definitely have been way overcritical of myself, absolutely, at times. And you know, I'm not entirely the best like analyst of my own psychology, so I don't really know where it came from, but it's definitely something that I've become aware of, and I'm, you know, I catch myself when I'm doing it now. A wee bit of self-criticism is good, though. I mean, you have to be able to critique your own work and also your own behavior. And then in terms of the other things, yeah, I mean, it's nice to hear I'm fiercely loyal. I'm fascinated as to who you've been talking to. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I am. I have a relatively small but very tight group of friends. And I don't really worry outside of that too much about, you know, I love working with people, and if they become friends, great. But, you know, I'm not seeking that. So yeah, I mean, it's a good way to sum me up, I think.
You literally sailed through school, I'm told. You were good at school, at the things you done. And so after primary school, university?
So I went to primary school in Derry. Then I went to St. Louis Grammar in Ballymena. And I was lucky, like academically. I worked, don't get me wrong, I did work. I did, you know, studied for it all. But I was lucky in that it came relatively easily. And then I went to Trinity in Dublin to study English. And there basically, it was a whole new life. It was a whole new life, I think, because I finally found myself doing the one thing, which was studying English literature, that I'd always just wanted to devote myself to, right? So right the way through school, you know, I was doing A-levels, I did chemistry, I did German, fine, grand, but it was English that I was like, this is, all I want to do is read books and write about them and maybe become a writer myself. So those 4 years in Dublin from 95 to 99, where it was a little bit of heaven, really, to think you kind of can't believe your luck. You're like, so all I have to do all week is go to these lectures, go to a couple of seminars and read books. It felt like, and then go to the pub. It felt like, it felt like it shouldn't be allowed. It was so much fun.
It's often said of good journalists, and I absolutely include you in that, and good writers, although I am not sure how you define good writers. I think anybody who has the courage to put their thoughts on paper to let others read it is good.
I totally agree.
But it's often said that inside all of those individuals, there's a dreamer trying to get out. There's a dream trying to be released. And were you a dreamer? Was that kind of, I know you wanted to write and journalism in equal amounts from an early age, but was there experiments up the stairs in the bedroom with a torch at night, writing short stories? Did you absorb the news? Did you kind of?
Yeah, so I suppose I kind of separate those two things about being a writer and being a journalist. So in terms of being a writer, I would have, right back to primary school, I would have been like writing wee plays and so on. But then something happened, and this is the confidence thing that I was talking to you about earlier, as I became a teenager and then into my 20s, where I just stopped doing all of that. I didn't know any writers. I don't think I'd ever met any of them, apart from maybe going to a reading. I knew nobody in TV or theatre or didn't know any novelists. It seemed, even though, and this might sound weird, even though I was studying English at university, it seemed like a kind of an alien thing. And I definitely had a thing as well, who cares what I have to say? I had that absolutely instilled in me, but it was self-instilled. Who cares what I have to say? Why should I write? If I write a short story, there's a million writers out there better than me. It's a very interesting thing to look back on. And I'll tell you, later about how I kind of got out of it. But journalism was very different. It seemed to me that journalism was something that was achievable because it was writing about things that were happening. It was, you're given a job to do, and you go off and you research it and you write it. And that seemed to me to be like, I can do this. So right through, I felt very confident doing it. When I was in Trinity, I was involved in the university newspaper and did loads of work there, loved writing anything. And that continued right through my 20s and 30s, whereby if someone gave me something to write, I would throw myself into it and love it. But I wonder, do any other writers understand this, or maybe aspiring writers? When it came to the blank page, disaster, nightmare. I felt like I had nothing to say. Like what I had to say was, irrelevant and better said by others. And that was just a really paralyzing thing for me, a really paralyzing thing. But I think if you're supposed to write, it can be as much an affliction as a vocation, in the sense that all those years where I wasn't writing creatively, it was really eating away at me. And they say, I've read there's nothing as unhappy as a writer who isn't writing. And I definitely was that guy. I was like, there was just a voice in my head going, you should be writing a novel, you should be writing a book. And sometimes I'd see people the same age or younger than me, getting books published or screenplays made into films or something. And I felt like I had missed out on the thing I was supposed to be doing. And it had literally started to drive me, well, not literally, but it had started to drive me kind of crazy.
If it's any consolation, I've interviewed a number of writers, successful authors and writers and journalists over the many months that we have been doing Scéalta. And they all talk about that period of insecurity, that period of saying, this is my heart and soul and my intellectual thinking. I'm going to put it on a page. Yeah. I'm going to put it on a website. I'm going to put it on television, which is what you've done, and judge it. You yes. Judge it and judge me. And one of them described it as putting your firstborn child up for performance. Yes. And it was as emotional as that. Mm-hmm. But I want to jump back and then jump forward, if that's okay. Yeah. You talked about your mother and your father, and I know your father was a very positive influence on your life, and he was a very stable character, a very well, kind of balanced person, and all of that. When you announced to your parents that the star child, which is how you're described, is going to be a journalist, was there kind of a, would you not try the bank? I can get you in.
No, not at all. They were not in the least surprised. I mean, I had been gravitating towards that since I was a teenager. They knew that I loved English literature, and so, for instance, I did my work experience in the Ballymena Times when I was 17. I was involved in the wee school radio station, so they knew that was what I wanted to do, and also journalism then, as now, was a relatively prestigious thing to be doing. So they were delighted. They were like, well, there he goes. And I remember there was a couple of years after university where I was kind of freelancing and working in magazines in Dublin, and they were proud of me. But I remember when I got the job in Spotlight in the BBC, that was a massive, massive thing, because we had, my dad was very interested in current affairs, and Spotlight was a thing that, he would have watched it every week. And I remember the theme music. I remember thinking, like when he was watching Panorama, like, this is serious stuff now. These are journalists and at the top of their game, and if they say something, it's true. And so I remember when I got the job in Spotlight, I was only
24.
24. I was 24.
24.
And I remember great celebrations in the house. We went out for a Chinese meal that night to celebrate it. They were just absolutely thrilled and delighted. Like, the idea that I would get a job in the BBC for a program like that at that age, they were totally thrilled. And there was never any attempt to kind of guide me towards anything else at all.
From a cub reporter on the Ballymena, what's the title of it?
No, I did work experience in the Ballymena Times. It was just a couple of weeks,
To the big time, as you say, to Spotlight and of course Panorama.
Yeah.
Was it just that 20 steps up? Was it what you expected initially? Were you the wee boy lost in the middle of all these?
Totally. So I had come from the world of magazines in Dublin, and I had been the managing editor of McGill magazine, which was a investigative current affairs magazine. But nonetheless, when I walked into the Spotlight office on that first day, and I looked around, and there's Stephen Walker there, and Kevin McGee, Mandy McCauley. I think Dara McIntyre was there. He just started a few months before me. And back then in 2002, it was the tail end of when everyone would still come in wearing suits. So everyone's wearing a suit and tie, as was I that day. But I remember sitting at my desk in the first morning and saying, I've bitten off more than I can chew here. I just felt, I've always been one for, in terms of career, like slightly trying to punch above my weight and get to the next. But I remember sitting there going, oh, no, this is, you've finally jumped off the deep end here, and you're not going to be able to swim with these people, because they were like, they were all brilliant journalists. I had no contacts in the North. I'd been in Dublin for 7 years, no contacts at all. Didn't really have any ideas for stories, completely out of my depth. But, I got lucky. I got a couple of programs under my belt, and then within about a year, I was doing the odd panorama. So it worked out. But yeah, utterly overwhelmed for the first few months.
You mentioned McGill magazine, and just for those who may not be aware of it, a satirical magazine that was the blight of Charlie Hawkey's life, he said, because it was investigative journalism at the rock face. This was on a shoestring budget, and it was get a new angle. I'm not saying create a new angle, but find a new angle. They were all out there. Yeah. And it began, I think, when you look at McGill, it began to turn the tide of journalism, particularly in the 26 counties. It kind of went places where certainly RTE didn't go, but other sources didn't go. Were you aware that it was a groundbreaking?
Oh yeah, I was aware of the pedigree, and Vincent Brown he'd relaunched it and sold it to Mike Hogan, but it's still, McGill, when I was working for it, still very much had that cachet and that pedigree. And when I went there from In Dublin magazine, which was it was kind of entertainment and interviews with Boyzone and that kind of thing. And I got into McGill when I was about 23, and because I'd done a good job on In Dublin, before that, I was made the managing editor and then the editor. Now I was like 23 or 24. That, I mean, in many ways it was ridiculous. And I was aware myself, and people around me were aware, going like, this is, you know, this is extremely young to be doing this job. But it was a great job. You know, there were just a lot of exciting times. We had a decent enough budget to commission, you know, long form articles. So yeah, it was a good kind of education before I went to the BBC, but still not enough. You know, still, I think I spent the first 5 or so years of my 20s constantly being baffled at where I'd ended up. You know, I had the same thing when I walked into the Panorama office and saw Peter Taylor and John Ware sitting there. And I sat down as a reporter on my first film. And I you know, again, I was just like, I really don't know what I'm doing here. Yeah, and it's funny when I look back now at all those moments, and I'm only thinking about it because I'm talking to you now, is that constant sense of imposter syndrome. But it always kind of worked out. You know, it always worked out. I just kept my mouth shut and kind of faked it and pretended I was supposed to be there, and it always kind of worked out.
You're aware, I'm sure you know of the Irish writer Walter Mackin.
Yes.
Walter Mackin, you know, the trilogy of stuff in the late 1930s and 1940s. And he talked about the nearly that syndrome that you're referring to. I mean, should I be here? And he talked about the bog and the man. You know, you can take the man from the bog, but you can't necessarily take the bog from the man. And he talked about it in a kind of quasi-romantic way of saying, you know, I'm not where I'm from. I'm not in the spot where I'm entitled to be. And I suspect what you're describing is Mackin's bog moment, that kind of thing.
Yes.
I want to ask you just the spotlight experience, which nearly shaped for the next quite large number of years your view of where you are, what you do, how you do it, and what you're about. Can you recall your first story?
Yeah, I can. My first story was called People for Sale, and it was an undercover investigation about Lithuanian workers coming to work on mushroom farms in the north and the south, but we concentrated on the north. And we actually hired 2 Lithuanian students who were 18 and 19 to pose as wannabe workers, and they got on to they were moved around various mushroom farms and down in Armagh, you know, paid badly. You know, so we exposed all of that, and it was a really remarkable program to work on, because within a few weeks of joining Spotlight, I was out in Vilnius in Lithuania, starting to film this undercover thing. It was all very, very exciting for a young, you know, man of my age. And like, here I am in Eastern Europe, about to go and front up to a people trafficker in a train station in rural Lithuania, with a cameraman and a kind of quasi security guard, and I was just like, so that was the start of it. And then over the next about 2 years, I did loads of stories where I just found myself in remarkable places. I was out in Kosovo and Pristina. In 2003, in September, we went out to Iraq, to Basra, where, you know, just after the invasion. And so suddenly I found myself thinking, okay, this is what it's like to be a journalist with real resources, where you can, and I did find myself all over the world. Like I was in Moscow and Washington and stuff. I remember one time when it really did make me stop and think was, I was following a story that involved Moscow and Washington. I was in Moscow one day, and we left there, you know, in the afternoon, flew to London, had a switchover flight for a couple of hours, straight over to Washington. I remember getting into my hotel in Washington that morning, and I really had one of those moments, you know, I was looking out the window going, I was in Moscow yesterday, and I'm in, like, that really felt to me like, this is amazing. And for a young journalist to be doing all those things within your first 6 months or a year of joining the program, it was kind of, romantic and fun and adventurous, and I was single at the time. So, you're able to like pick up a bag and go anywhere. So yeah, it fulfilled all of my expectations really for the first few years. I was like, it can't get any better. This is just so much fun.
Not to kind of knock you off kilt, but can I just tell you, when we asked the same question about someone else who is well, they were a friend of yours until they talked about you, and maybe you'll not be friends for much longer. But what they said was,
do your research. You really do your research, don't you?
But what they said was that unlike a lot of journalists, and certainly young journalists, is that the story didn't end with a broadcast for you. That you took the story home with you, so that you became not only an observer to the program, you became part of the plight of the person or persons that you were filming or interviewing. Is that? Do you recognize that? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is. Now, I used to get very emotionally involved, and I also sometimes used to question what we were doing. And I think as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, you need a little piece of ice in your heart to think, if you're going after someone, you have to feel fundamentally this person deserves to be gone after, and they deserve what's coming to them. And sometimes there were times when I'd be like, jumping out of a van to doorstep someone, and in the back of my mind I would be thinking, is this really on? Is this really what I want to be doing? Do I really want to be startling someone on the road and shouting questions at them? And that's just the truth. I would never ever have admitted that at the time. Sometimes I think maybe was I a little bit soft, and maybe I was. And then the flip side of it as well is that was I did find it hard to step away from people who were, you parachute into someone's life, they're having a terrible time, and I find it hard to kind of divest myself from that afterwards. And I'd keep in touch with people, still do sometimes, still in touch with some of them. I wonder, so I don't know whether maybe every journalist feels that and does what I did and kind of just doesn't talk about it, or whether I in particular was just a big softie who couldn't let it all go. Like,
let me give you an opinion, an Ansonian opinion. I don't think every journalist does feel like that. I think journalism has, like every walk of society, as people have different levels of compassion, different levels of friendship, different all of that. So, and I don't actually, in fairness to you, I don't think you were a big softie. I think you were absorbed in a job that was more than a job. So that's just an observation, and you may not disagree with that.
I think as well, I think I find it easy to see two sides of an argument, right? I don't see the world as binary. I don't see it as black and white. I see it as a very messy and complex thing. And often, if you're doing adversarial investigative journalism, your job is to see it as black and white. Here's a baddie. We're going to expose this baddie. We're going to tell you why they're bad, and we're going to put them on camera and present them as being bad. I think too often maybe I was able to see both sides of the story, and I used to think of that as a weakness. That I could almost hold two slightly contradictory opinions at the same time and go, oh, well, I kind of see what's happening, and maybe it was, and for an investigative journalist, maybe it was a weakness. I think as I've grown older, I've seen it. I don't feel like it's a weakness anymore. And as a screenwriter, it helps me a lot, because when I'm writing dialogue now, I find it very easy to be in the head of someone. And then when I jump to the next character who is in conflict with them, I find it quite easy to be in their head too. So what seemed to me to be a bit of an anchor in journalism seems to help me in screenwriting.
I want to come to the second. Well, I want to come to a quite important relationship that you developed with Adam Patterson.
Yeah.
Before I do, I just need to give people a sense of this. You're at the head of your career. You're with the cream of that tier of investigative journalists. You're on an equal basis, an equal footing professionally with them.
Yeah.
And things seem to be leaving aside this kind of thing at the back of your head that you want to read, you want to be doing that. But in terms of your ability to do that job, you're still you're waltzing through it.
Yeah.
And your father dies.
Yeah.
And I know that like any father or any parent who passes away is a traumatic and a difficult time. But for you, it was particularly difficult. You described it nearly as bringing home a reality. So your father had died of cancer, I believe.
Yeah, esophageal cancer.
Okay. Without dragging all of this out of you, but just briefly tell me about that.
Oh no, I'm very happy to talk about it, Joe. Because it was a really seminal and formative influence for me. It was a turning point looking back. It didn't seem like it at the time. It took a few years to kind of to become that. But so yeah, my dad was always like just a really healthy man. He liked playing golf. He loved socializing. He wasn't a particularly big drinker or anything, but he loved his mates and he loved having barbecues in the summer and going out golf and stuff. And it was just, we had never really had experience of cancer in our family, to be perfectly honest. We had, my mother's brother had tragically died from it, but in terms of, grandparents and, like immediate, very close family, it wasn't something that had massively touched us. And then, yeah, he had trouble swallowing one day. He went to the doctors, series of tests. He was diagnosed with it. I was about 32 at the time, huge shock for us. But the initial prognosis was, was pretty good. They felt they'd caught it early and they felt that, they could do a lot with some surgery and radiotherapy and stuff. And it just didn't work out like that. He rallied a little bit after his surgery, but then very quickly went downhill. And so basically within a year of diagnosis, he was dead. And I think watching anyone waste away like that is just horrific, but particularly for me, he was just someone who took such enjoyment out of life. His favorite phrase was, "Isn't it a wonderful day to be alive?" I actually said that at his funeral, and everyone recognized it when I said it at his funeral. It was the thing he would say on, say, a sunny day. He had the caravan up at Benone with my mum that they loved, and sunny day, if he was going out with his golf clubs, he'd always say that. So anyway, full of joie de vivre and fun. Loved playing the guitar, loved singing songs, all of that. So a very traumatic year as we watch him fading away in front of our eyes. And then he died. And basically, I kind of quietly lost the run of myself after that. And I say quietly because it wouldn't have been particularly obvious to anyone. I was still doing my job. I was still, had 3 young kids, still looking after the kids, or 2 at the time. Still being there, but in my head, I was just reeling all over the place. But I think the thing that I felt that was basically slammed home to me like a punch in the face is that, life is short. Life is short. He was 56 when he was diagnosed and 57 when he died. And you better be living it. You better be living it in a way that you can stand over and that you can look back on, basically, because I'd seen my father looking back on his life, and I said, well, if I ever have to look back on my life, I want to be able to say that, yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to do with it. Now, this took a few years to shake down, right? I spent several years being quite an unsteady ship, thinking, do I want to continue being a journalist? It seemed to me that the world kind of closed in on me through the grieving process. And yeah, I found it really difficult, really, it just kind of made me question everything, basically. It just made me question everything. And maybe what happened was that event was the catalyst for things that were kind of slow burning anyway. But yeah, it was a very difficult few years in my mid-30s.
And I know, because you talk about it, you had tremendous support at home
Oh
for
God.
whatever you decide to do. We will support.
Yeah, that's it.
From your partner and
Yeah, my wife Breach,
Yeah.
I mean, has always been like that. I mean, I'm just outrageously lucky to, you know, she and I have been together since school, apart from a few years in my early to mid 20s when we split up and then we got back together. But she's always been there and incredibly supportive. And you know, that was so important in many ways, like, especially when I was making this move out of journalism and into writing. There was a couple of years, 18 months to 2 years, where financially that was really sketchy. You know, I was leaving behind a job where I got paid in the middle of every month a really decent wage, to something where nothing was certain anymore, really. I mean, I had a few things that were looking kind of good, or else I wouldn't have left the job, but nothing was certain. And so to have her there supporting me and emotionally, and also kind of, I mean, to be frank, paying the bills, was, I think, quite a rare thing, probably, you know, quite a, I really feel like extremely lucky that that was the approach she took.
Can I just give you a quote on quote? At least there's one adult in this relationship.
Exactly.
I don't know why that's familiar, but
anyway. It's so true. I mean,
I have to say, it is a very courageous step. And I want to talk about Adam in a second, but you know, the Salisbury poisoning program is there among investigative journalism at its very best. If you had any real doubts about your ability, if you had any real doubts about, I mean, this is something that people will study in journalism school. This is something, and despite all of that, you meet Adam and you say, you know something, I'm 43, I think, was it?
So Adam and I'm 44 now, and he and I wrote our first little short film together in the summer of 2013, 7 years ago. So I would have been then 37. He would have been about 31, 30.
And you go off to be, I have to say, it's successful, but it may not have seemed like that at the time, but a successful scriptwriter. So
yeah. So at the time, summer of 2013, I was still in current affairs. I was branching out into kind of producing and directing as well as being on screen. And it was grand. I'd made a few things I was proud of, but I definitely, you know, the voice was louder and louder now. My dad had been dead 3 or 4 years. And I was very, very much wondering, like, is there more to life than this? Am I capable of more? Could I do something totally different? And it was funny, the way that Adam and I met. I was working on Panorama, and they sent me to Wales to do a thing in Cardiff, and the producer and the cameraman weren't coming that night. But Adam, who was a freelance assistant producer I'd never met, the producer rang me and said, look, there's a guy, you might see him around the hotel. He's also from Northern Ireland. He's going to be working with us. So I arrived into the hotel that night with my suitcase, and sitting at the bar, drinking a whiskey, was this guy a bit younger than me. And I walked up and said, "You Adam?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm Adam, actually." I said, "Well, like, should we, do you want to go out and grab dinner or something? I'll drop my bag up." We went out and had an amazing, brilliant night out. You know, had dinner, went for pints, ended up doing karaoke, right? So we had this brilliant night out. He works with us the next day, and then I never saw him again. You know, we just had a great night out, and cheerio the next day. He went off to do his thing. And then about 7 or 8 months later, a friend of mine, Elis Hart, who worked with us in Spotlight and Panorama, a bunch of us, there was about 7 or 8 of us, went out for a drink after work. And I can't remember why we did that or what context, but there was a bunch of us out, and she said, "Oh, I've just got a new flatmate. He's just moved in with me. Do you mind if I ask him to come and join us?" And we were all like, yeah, bring him down. And Adam walks in, and I was like, "Oh, it's you from Cardiff." And he was like, "Oh man." So from that moment on, basically kind of second serendipitous meeting, we were friends and we did a bit of work together. But the thing about him was whatever deficit of confidence I had about being creative and writing, he was the opposite. And you'll meet it, you'll see it if you ever meet him. He's just incredibly confident and courageous about life. And it's just like, let's try it. He's always, let's try it. Let's go for it. Let's have a go. So he kind of filled that gap for me.
Can I just say that he is so cool that it should be made illegal?
Yeah, he's a cool dude. Yeah, he's a cool dude.
And again, if it's any consolation, I think if you're asking him about that, your side of that relationship, he'll talk about you being an anchor and solid and determined and meticulous and all of that. So don't sell yourself short.
No, I won't sell myself short, but it's a complementary relationship rather than, it's not the case that we're both the same. We're both quite different actually in our approach to life and the world. But I think that's what makes it work. You know, he brings things that I don't bring and vice versa.
Absolutely.
So anyway, yeah, he was probably the first person to ever read something. I wrote the first draft of this little short film based on some transcripts that he had given me of interviews with a young man in North Belfast. And he was the first person to go, you know, this is really bloody good. This is brilliant. We have to send this somewhere. And I was like, oh, you can't send it anywhere. Well, but indeed we did. And that was the kind of start of it.
We've been talking for almost an hour.
Have we?
Yes, so it mightn't seem like that. And my difficulty, but you know, if I had any authority, I would have Scéalta, the time of Scéalta external.
You know, it's funny. It seems that there's so much we haven't talked about.
But there is, of course. We all are influenced by others, some for the better and some for the worse. And I spoke about your father's influence, very positive influence on your life. And I know your mother also, and I know you were great comfort to each other. And all of the family, your sister and your brother, all of your family in the aftermath of the death of your father. But your own children, I'm told, are a tremendous influence on your life. Do you enjoy being a father?
Oh, it's the best. It's the best job. Of course, it's the best job of them all. Like, I look at them now. The girls are 14 and 12, fourth year and second year in Aquinas, and then Patrick's in P7 and Liam's just started P1. And I look at particularly the older ones who are now, you know, the girls are almost the same height as me. And, you know, Patrick's plays hurling and is becoming a big boy. And I feel just bemused and befuddled. I look at them and I go like, have I brought you all up? Like, look at the size of you. And also, you know, I'm just delighted with how they've turned out and their personalities and you know, their character. And you know, first of all, it makes me feel kind of old. But also, there's something I think at a certain point in fatherhood where you are, you're kind of astonished by them. You know, you're just kind of astonished. You just look at them and you go, look at the size of you. And look at you're a full person with all these friends and this life and these interests. And, you know, like it seems like, you know, 20 minutes ago, you were like, I was cradling you. It's amazing.
I think the eternal battle between father and children is, do you be their friend?
Yeah.
Be their father?
Yeah.
Have you worked that one out? Because if you haven't, tell me how you do it.
Well, I'll tell you, I've always been fascinated by that too. And Breege, my wife, is brilliant at communicating with the girls and you know, Patrick too, but the girls are very important at this time because they're essentially teenagers, like, and they're great. You know, they come to her with their problems and their issues and so all I can say is long may that continue, you know, because we do have a relationship with them at the moment where if there's a problem online or in school or anywhere, they will tell us. And I literally just have my fingers and toes crossed that continues, because that's all that you can hope for, is that they tell you stuff. And obviously I'm sure they're not telling us everything, but if they tell you the big stuff that's bothering them, that's all you can hope for. And they are at the moment. But I have to say that's definitely credit to Breed. She's just, you know, she's just great at that kind of thing. Like, but yeah, fatherhood's just amazing. And there's no doubt about it as well that, you know, after my dad's death, I take less for granted, you know.
Yeah.
If one of them says, can we do something? I just go and do it unless I'm critically involved. Like Patrick and I have started playing a game of chess, and he came to me last night. I was watching some good on TV and he said, do you want a game of chess? And I was like, yep, let's go, come on. You know, and I think again, that's the result of realizing that, you know, all of this adventure could be over at any time. Like,
I want to finish our conversation, but I suspect that at some stage in the lifespan of Scéalta, we're going to come back. We're going to see you getting an Academy Award or some prestigious stuff for your screenwriting. And I'm going to be able to say, I knew that guy. Yeah. But in those moments when you're not being a father, being a writer, you're not being self-critic, when you're not being all those things. And I know you love walking, and I know you love particularly hill walking. I think around County Down, is that?
Well, I go to the Mourns a bit, but I also like Benevena up on the North Derry coast. You know, they're just where Benoan kind of down, all right there. That's
beautiful.
I love it up there.
When you do that, when you're out walking, when you're facing the elements, sometimes on your own, but when you do all of that, is there still a book hitting you at the back of the head saying, you need to write me, you need to get me out, you need to write me?
Yeah, of course there is. Of course there is, and it'll be something steeped in this place and my experiences of this place, and maybe my experience of journalism. Of course there is, but right now, you know, I'm busy being a screenwriter, and I love it. I really love it. So it's not the same feeling that I had in my 30s, where it was eating away at me. It's more like a calm thing, like a possibility for the future. But I suppose if there's one thing I'd want to add as we finish, it's just, I guess, you know, like I spent a lot of time in my life doing a job that I, you know, basically enjoyed, but feeling that there was something else. And if there's anybody watching this in that same position, all I can say is that in taking the first step, it's not going to fundamentally change your life. It took me, you know, 7 years, but there's a wonderful, wonderful release in starting to take the first few tentative steps towards the person that you think you should be. And you know, I'm a long way along that journey now, but every step of it, you know, is kind of changes you and makes you better, I think.
And I know, again, speaking to people who are close to you, that there's a sense of fulfillment, you know, that there's a very abused expression of being happy with your lot, but there's that fulfillment. The fact, this is probably the very last question.
No.
Are you working on anything that we should watch out for, that we should kind of keep an eye on?
So all of my work for the next 2.5 years will be with Adam. You know, he and I have a brilliant creative working relationship. So the first thing we're doing is directing a film in March and April starring James Norton, the British actor. There's a female lead as well. We're in the process of casting her. So we're incredibly excited about that because we're directing that, not just writing, directing. Very exciting. And then there is I can't say what it is or what it's about, but there's a TV series coming down the line as well. So that Adam are writing, and hopefully we'll do some directing on that. So yeah, it's a busy next couple of years, touch wood and thank God. And yeah, in terms of being happy with my lot, I feel terrible saying it in the middle of a pandemic when so many people are having a hard time. But finally, yeah, I am. Finally, it's like coming into this office every day and opening the laptop and writing that's it for me. I never want to do anything else.
If in your journey and if the work in front of you, if you're looking for a mature leading man, you know, you have my number, just ring me. And I will act naked as well. So you have to ask it, sir. Can I thank you for being a great guest?
Thank you. It's been a total pleasure. I could talk to you all day, honestly. And your level of research is immense. I would have been very proud of that as a Panorama reporter.
Well, we let go there. We'll have a coffee and I'll break all the secrets.
I want to know your sources.
But I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for taking us on that journey. I want to also thank you, and you might not have a sense of this because you're the victim and I'm the interviewer, which is a change for you. But let me just say that coming through all of the answers to all of the questions, some which are personal, some are professional, is this spark. If you want to do it and you think you can do it, you will do it. So for being my guest, sorry, I give you the last.
No, that's it.
For being my guest and for being at Scéalta, can I thank you, Gordon? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.